I kept dating the same person, just in different bodies. I didn't trust myself. I just remember feeling like a shell of the woman that I once was. This is it. I'm borderline personality disorder. And then my therapist told me, whatever you do, do not look this up.
How common is this feeling of not enough?
Those labels, we internalize them. They show up now as limiting beliefs, or they show up as like tension in our body, shoulder pain from carrying the weight of the world. It's not that we want to get rid of these emotions. We just want to get rid of the associations with them. We're people, we're humans. We just want to be loved and accepted by the other person. We want to feel like we're safe. We want to feel like we belong.
If I focus on releasing a limiting belief, can that simultaneously heal an inner child wound?
I don't even know how to describe it. I feel like a firework is exploding inside of me. Sometimes we end up playing small. We end up people pleasing. We end up hiding a little bit. For me, I was hiding behind alcohol, and then I was hiding behind lovers, and then I was hiding behind work, and even now I still catch myself hiding in creativity.
By the end of this episode, how do you want the listeners to feel?
I want the listeners to feel like they have more of a choice in their life, in their actions, in their thoughts. I want them to start to feel like they can really begin to liberate themselves from old patterns with a sense of play and lightheartedness. And I feel like the word that keeps coming up is just choice. I want the listeners to feel like they're in control with their choices.
When you say lightheartedness and when you say choice, what comes to mind? What area of life?
Emotions. When I think of lightheartedness and choice and play, I think of emotions. And I think of emotions because we live in such a loud and busy world where there's so much catastrophizing and second guessing. So many of us know that little voice in our head of fear, of self doubt, of imposter syndrome. And sometimes those emotions feel so gosh darn heavy. Nobody wants to wake up in the morning and be like, you know what? I want to work on my shame today. Like, let me just dive right into guilt. And I think because of that heaviness that comes with these bigger emotions, oftentimes we feel like we don't have a choice when we experience guilt or anger or rage. And so when I think of bringing in lightheartedness, I think about bringing it into the crevices of our life that are so inundated with pain and heaviness and taboo.
When people do have that shame and that guilt and they don't want to dive into it, do they need to dive into it, or what is the best approach when they are feeling that way?
You know, I wouldn't say that they need to dive into it, but what I would say is coming back to that feeling of choice. I think sometimes when we're working on our personal growth or development or trying to break away from old patterns, sometimes we catch ourselves in that have to, I need to, I have to. And that puts us back in survival language. It has us tighten our body. Next thing you know, we're holding our breath without even realizing it. To the viewers, I wonder, are you holding your breath right now? No judgment. But I think when we find ourselves catching ourselves doing the same thing over and over, like, okay, Jessica, I promise I won't do that thing again. And then 2 weeks later, 3 months later, we're like, oh, shiitake, I totally did that thing again. At some point in time, I think we hit a place in our lives and our development and our evolution and our healing where we just want to. We want to start working on these areas of our life like guilt or shame. And I think the most beautiful way to start doing that is just leaning into it with choice and curiosity, as opposed to the I have to, or I need to, or I'm broken kind of mindset that many of us go into growth and healing with.
With over 7 years of experience and 2 degrees, what has shaped your approach to embodiment and somatic practices more? Your academic background or life's experience?
Definitely life's experience, thinking about what we really learn more from, whether it's our success or our failures. For me, it's definitely from those moments of being, you know, covered in failure and shame and guilt. And I love my degrees. I love my academics and the credentials that it gives me. But the truth is, it wasn't enough for me. Jessica. Like, I remember getting my degree and just feeling like there was some disconnect for me in the psychology space. I felt like it was bringing a lot of people to awareness without giving them tactile tools. And so I kind of hung up my psychology shoes until my own, breakthrough, awakening, breakdown, like whatever you want to call it, in 2014. And it was in that space that I realized conventional wasn't working for me. Therapy alone wasn't enough. Energy work alone wasn't enough. I realized that I deserved something that was a little bit more holistic, something that was a little bit more unconventional and out of the box, because I had learned that at that point in my life, one size did not fit all. And so, really, from my own experience of picking little bits and pieces from cognitive therapy, from dialectical therapy, from energy work, from improv and play, I was really able to create this kind of multifaceted, really weird, quirky, playful approach to offer people a lighthearted space to heal.
I want to dive into your personal journey a little bit more. Could you expand on what happened in 2014?
Yeah, so in 2014, originally, I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. And I remember sitting on this little green love seat in my therapist's office, and he gave me the diagnosis. And at first, I felt so excited. I just remember thinking, like, this wave of relief. I'm not crazy. I'm not broken. This is it. I'm borderline personality disorder. And then my therapist told me, whatever you do, do not look this up. So of course, like, I go outside, go into my little Subaru, the air hits my face. It's like a hot summer day in New Hampshire. And I immediately start looking at borderline personality disorder. And I learn there's no effective treatment. I learned that I'm like psychotic, that I'm broken, that I'm helpless, that there's no medication that could ever help me. I start seeing all these crazy movie references. And that was actually the last day I went to therapy for like a year or two, because I was so, what's the point? And I don't know if anybody's ever felt that before. Like, what's the point of even trying? I know I'm just going to fail. And then the next year, I was in Czech Republic, and I was on a dirty theater floor in the summer of like June 2015, again, covered in stale beer, popcorn, definitely under the blanket of shame and guilt. And it was in that moment that I realized I just was in the same pattern of my life. I kept dating the same person, just in different bodies. I was in the most toxic, abusive relationship I'd ever been in. I was swallowing my words even more, and I didn't trust myself. And I just remember feeling like a shell of the woman that I once was. And for the first time in a long time, on that dirty theater floor, I heard a little voice that was like, get up. And it had been a really long time since I had heard any voice of my own that wasn't self-deprecating or catastrophizing. And in hearing that voice for the first time in a really, really long time, it felt like I had a choice in my life. I had a choice to get back up. And I also knew that getting back up and choosing myself was going to take a lot of work. And I think that area of my choice was like biting my fingers, like, okay, I'm ready to choose me. I'm ready to choose healing. And then it's like, well, are you ready to choose the partnership that comes with that, the work that comes with that? But I was just so excited to have choice in my life that I was like, throw my hands up, let's figure it out. And day by day, week by week, I really was able to pull myself physically and metaphorically off that floor.
Mhm. Um, this hits home because I actually lived with someone who was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. I didn't know until we were no longer living together, but it was just like a huge aha moment. Like, that makes a lot of sense. It was quite the experience. I wish it upon no one. But that being said, I would never, ever in a million years, you would be the last person on this planet that I've ever met that I would put that label on. So I'm wondering, how in the world did you go from where you were then, like, to now? Because obviously you are not in the same place, and you did find a way out despite the internet saying that there is no cure and there's no hope. So, how did you go from there to here?
This is going to sound really extreme, but there was a point when I was getting up off of that floor that I made the decision that no matter what happened, I would never abandon myself again. And at that point in time in my borderline journey, I had been bounced around from anti-anxiety medication to antidepressants. I had tried all the different types of healing modality. I'm pretty sure like I smelled like lavender all the time, and none of it was working. And for anybody who's listening to this who's unfamiliar with borderline personality disorder, it's it's a beautiful multifaceted disorder, and statistics continue to rise. It is one of the most dangerous personality disorders, with about 10% even of rising teens dying by suicide. So this is a very big disorder that not many people know about. It's difficult to be diagnosed. It's characterized by things like distorted sense of self, intense fears of abandonment. I mean, a lot of things that many of us in the human experience can relate to. But the big thing is just emotional dysregulation. So getting like triggered and then being like, I'm so upset. And then it could take a couple of minutes or hours or weeks or months to kind of come down. And I think for me in my journey, in that moment of choosing myself, I really had to learn how to love and accept all parts of me. I had to lean into radical self acceptance. I had to start taking accountability for myself and my feelings. I had to navigate my intense fear of abandonment, which at times would make me stay in really extremely abusive relationships. At times, it would make me just catastrophize and fear of like, is everything okay? Like, oh no, the world is ending. But learning how to navigate those feelings of fear, of distortion, that's really where it all changed for me. And I'm grateful to say, it's been 7 years since I've been on medication and 7 years since I've had a panic attack. And so I'm really grateful that this approach that is learning how to come home to self, learning how to accept all parts of us, our shame, our guilt, our fear, our rage, those moments of depression without judgment, but with choice, love, compassion, and curiosity, things start to change. Because it's not that we want to get rid of these emotions. We just want to get rid of the associations with them.
That's powerful. Reading from your website, I empower overachieving, empathetic women to silence their inner critic and break away from the mindset of not enough. How common is this feeling of not enough?
Huge, and statistically speaking, it's stronger in women. And there's so many different reasons for that, whether it's societal expectations, cultural experiences, like, just these moments of being, I like to call it the too much wound. If you've ever been told you're too much, you're too dramatic, you're too crazy, you're too wild, I think sometimes we end up playing small. We end up people pleasing. We end up hiding a little bit. For me, I was hiding behind alcohol, and then I was hiding behind lovers, and then I was hiding behind work, and even now I still catch myself hiding in creativity. But I think because so many of us carry this wound of being authentic, of being ourselves, of giving ourselves this full expression, only to have people around us say, tone it down, put a lid on it. You're shining too bright. It makes us self-conscious. Again, at our core, we're people, we're humans. We just want to be loved and accepted by the other person, by the world. We want to feel like we're safe. We want to feel like we belong. So if over time we have people who are telling us that we're too much, we're too big, we're too wild, we start to feel like we have to limit ourselves. And we live in a world of production where it's like burnout and overwhelm, that's the norm. you know it's like the bigger your to-do list, the sexier you are, the more value you bring. And it leaves so many of us in that what's next mindset. We finish something, we hit a big goal in our life, but we're not really taught how to celebrate it. I mean, how many times have we, even the viewers listening, how many times have you done something and been so that feeling of accomplishment and then been like, all right, what's next? We're so quick to move to what's next. And we're so quick to play small because we don't want to be too big. And one of the side effects of that is feeling like no matter what we do in this life, in this day, it's never enough.
Mm.
And that's just one of the side effects that comes with those wounds.
So many different directions I want to go in here. Starting with the too much piece, that often comes up for me as well, because I look at even other people and I think, oh, like if they're too much for me in this way, then I'm not their person. Same for you. If you think about yourself, if I'm too much, then they're not my person, or these aren't my people. I'm in the wrong room. So it's kind of like that saying that rejection is redirection, whether it's the friends you're surrounding yourself with, or the colleagues, the relationships you're exploring, whatever it is. It's that feeling of the too much is just signaling to you that that's not for you.
Yeah. And I think it's a beautiful invitation. I love that, the invitation to have it be a redirection. And I think that that's something that can be so powerful when we're in our adult space, when we can be like, okay, I get it. I've lived enough of this life to know that my time is valuable and I deserve respect. But I think sometimes, most of the time, a lot of the women that I work with and the men as well who like trickle into my little like campus of love is these wounds that happen when we're teenagers. These wounds that happen when maybe we're in our early 20s where we're still not fully grounded in our authentic expression. We're still not fully safe and secure in our identity. And especially when this happens when we're younger, whether we're children or teenagers and our nervous system is still developing. Part of what I do is somatics. And so it's really understanding that these experiences that we have aren't just in the mind, but really this interconnected approach to the body. And that's why you can hear a sound or smell something and you feel it in your body. If you think about a beautiful lover or partnership that you had or an amazing work experience, a part of your body like kind of starts to wake up or activate. And just like we can hold those beautiful memories of gratitude and joy, our body also stores those memories of being a teenager and being called too much, being made fun of by our peers, or maybe having a teacher who said something that we didn't know how to process. And because we didn't know how to process those labels, we internalize them. They show up now as limiting beliefs, or they show up as like tension in our body, shoulder pain from carrying the weight of the world. And I love the redirection as an adult and the reminder that sometimes when these wounds happen when we're younger too, we don't always have the skills to redirect. But as adults, we can really mirror these two patterns of our life together for even bigger levels of empowerment and sovereignty, even more freedom for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. This conversation is quite timely. Speaking of somatics, I have a very close friend who is also a somatic practitioner, and we were speaking about my chair, and when I'm working, when I'm recording anything, podcast, anything, and how it's not ideal with my setup because of the way that I have to hold my body. And if you watch other podcasts, they'll be sitting in chairs where their body is completely relaxed. So they don't even have to think about their body being comfortable or anything. Like they're just sitting there and they can focus and be present and have the conversation. And so I'm explaining to my friend how I've got to figure out a solution for my chair because it doesn't support me in that way. I have to kind of focus on keeping my posture because of just the way it's designed and everything. And so then we start talking about somatics and how that's going to, how it affects everything. Because if I don't hold my posture, if I do slump, and I don't just mean me, but just in everyday life, however we carry our bodies, however we hold ourselves, that's how we're going to show up. That's going to present how we feel about ourselves. And so then it trickles on and other people view us the way that we view ourselves. So it's just so important the way that we hold our bodies.
Yeah, and I love just that reminder, how are you sitting? What's your posture? What muscles are you using? Which ones are being like overexerted? The body is like a beautiful detailed map of the subconscious mind. It stores all of our experiences. And so if we are in a place where we're using, maybe we're misaligned in our posture, and then we're having experiences of stress and we're leaning forward or our muscles are overworking, our body is going to also start to store that stress in that part of the body. That's why sometimes we can feel like that lower back tension or the upper shoulders. And somatics is such a beautiful invitation to really, we only have one life with this body, and it's the only partner that we really get to have all the way through. And it's hard when we live in a culture that's like, pain is weakness, leaving the body, like rub some dirt in it. It's a interesting circle to come back around as an adult and be like, I need a better chair, or when you talked about it doesn't support me in the way that I need, coming back to discovery, like, well, what support do I need? What support does my body need?
Yes, exactly. Some of your specialties are inner child work, limiting beliefs, anxiety, and overcoming trauma. How much of this is intertwined? For instance, if I focus on releasing a limiting belief, can that simultaneously heal an inner child wound?
Oftentimes they're really connected, especially in the way in which I do it. I know limiting beliefs is this like buzzword that everyone's like, oh yeah, especially as it becomes more mainstream, which is a beautiful thing. But when we think about limiting beliefs, really thinking them as beliefs that limit us in some way. Another beautiful name for them is emotionalized thoughts, because they're thoughts that were created during emotionalized times in our life. Now, both of these limiting beliefs and emotionalized thoughts we hold to be true. Our body holds to be true. Studies show that if you say a limiting belief or an emotionalized thoughts like, I'm irresponsible, it gets processed in the same part of the brain as truth. The same part of the brain that says, I'm Desiree Caminos. And that's a wild thing to know that sometimes when we have these limiting beliefs, especially when we don't address them at the core roots, when we're just kind of like trimming the hedges and making sure that it's manageable for the day, it normally ends up sprouting back up. And by working on the inner child work, oftentimes when that emotionalized experience happened, where we didn't have the coping skills or mechanisms to process these things, these traumatic experiences. And I know that trauma is also a really big word that tends to trigger everyone, not everyone, but many people. But if we imagine trauma as any time our needs were not met or we felt unsafe, that kind of opens up the trauma box a little bit, because something that could be traumatic to a 6-year-old wouldn't necessarily be traumatic to us. And I think as we move into adulthood, we look back on our childhood experiences with adult understanding. My parents were doing the best they could. Okay, maybe I was being a really difficult child. Like my teacher wasn't, I probably would have done the same thing. But at that time in our life, we don't know any different. Our body doesn't know any different. So as our nervous system is developing, it starts to develop with these thoughts. It starts to get stored in our body, which is again, when we tell ourselves we're not going to do something, and then 2 weeks later we do it, it's because it's still stored in our nervous system. It's because we still haven't really fully released that original wound. And so when it comes to these 3 areas, the emotionalized thoughts or limiting beliefs, trauma work, and inner child work, they really are so interconnected in that space. And a beautiful thing is finding ways to lean into it from a sense of play, especially if you've gone through some shiitake in your life.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but even if you don't remember the things that happened when you were 3 or 6 years old, they still get stored in your body. right?
Yeah, exactly.
So then what can you do if you can't recall whatever it was? Is there a way that you can release it or work through it, even if you don't have the memory of it?
I guess my question in that space would be the intention, you know, always coming down to the intention. So say that maybe we're trying to work on an experience from when we're 3 or when we're 4 that we can't fully remember, especially if we've had difficult childhoods, our brain tends to kind of change. And what I mean by that is when we go through traumatic experiences or when we get triggered, our brain turns into a zoo. So imagine that your brain's a zoo when you get triggered and you've got this guard dog that starts barking. And that guard dog is your amygdala. And so the guard dog is barking, that amygdala, it's letting everyone know there's a danger, perceived danger. And then, I mean, think of like, Jessica, how would you feel if like there was a dog barking around you all day? Like, you'd probably be a little frazzled.
Very, very frustrated.
And so is your wise owl. And your wise owl is like your prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for your logical thought and rational thinking. That owl is like, I can't think rationally. That dog has been barking since like 5 a.m. Like I can't. And the other one, which is coming back to memory, is the hippocampus. And you can imagine that as the hippo in your brain, which is responsible for memory. When that guard dog is barking, that hippo is freaking out. It's frazzled. It's frustrated. It goes underwater. And that's why when we think about experiences, when we were feeling emotional or feeling unsafe or our needs weren't being met, it gets a little distorted. We can have a difficult time remembering it, especially when we're really young. And that guard dog is so loud and our hippo is untrained. That is just going to fully submerge and hide into the depths of our subconscious. So asking ourselves, like, okay, now that I know what's going on in my brain and I want to bring up this experience, why? Do I want to bring it back up because I feel like it's connected to my pattern of, you know, overachieving? I get it. I was addicted to overachieving, like wore that yes girl as a badge of honor. And so it's like, okay, well, I know that I want to work on this experience because I believe it might be tied to this. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to start working on some areas around this concept of overachieving and just start getting myself to navigate that space before I fully go into it. Because if your body isn't sharing it with you, it's probably because there's an invitation for some other healing to happen before you can hold the space of that. We're all holding stuff from our day, from our week, from our friends, from our parents, from our sisters, our siblings, like whoever. We're carrying a lot of stuff. And maybe that part of your timeline, that part of your life just requires a little bit more of you before you can hold it. So, what can you start to drop? What can you start to put down? And what parts of yourself can you start to open up to start building that inner muscle of trust and like resilience to be able to hold that big memory so your body can feel safe in releasing it to you?
Now that I'm hearing these words, I do recall listening to something where they were basically saying that these beliefs that are buried so deeply, they will start to come up when your body feels safe or when your, I guess, higher self or just you as a person are in an environment where you feel safe. That's when they kind of come to light.
Yeah. And safety is a really big thing. Your body buried or like blocked or is hiding this memory from you because it doesn't feel safe in it. Because that experience that happened was probably so big that it was like, okay, I don't know how to process that. That was wild. So I'm just gonna I'm just gonna put it in the freezer. I'm gonna bury it under the rug and we'll come back to it at some point. you
Mhm.
know I think it's a little different than being like, I'd like to remember what it was like when I was in the womb or when I was first born. I think that's a little bit different, just from like a neuroscience, like development standpoint. But from these experiences, it really is safety. your body and your mind just wanting to keep you safe in the only way that it knows how right now.
I like to share tangible insights and
Mm.
kind of like tips with the listeners. So, for those that are struggling, for those who are struggling with overactive minds and a fear of failure, what practical steps can they start with to embark on a journey of healing?
Mm. So, overactive mind, drop into the body. The most beautiful way to drop out of the analytical mind is to engage your body, to really start moving your senses. You know, for anyone who's watching or for listening, can you rub your fingers together, your pointer finger and your thumb? And can you rub them together? And can you do it so softly that you can feel the ridges of your fingertips? And how
Ooh,
soft can you go before they stop touching? This is a really simple exercise from positive intelligence, but what it does is it takes so much focus. We're like, yeah, of course I can rub our fingers together. But then when you start going slow, it drops you out of the analytical mind. It brings you back to the body, especially when our analytical mind is normally going really fast. It's probably a little bit in survival still. That guard dog is barking. It's like, we've got to get stuff done. So it can be hard. Another great way to drop out of the analytical mind is to have a little cheat sheet of things that you can do. Because again, that hippo is going to be buried. Write the finger trick down. Maybe for you, it's like actually does like my mind is way too strong for my finger trick. Maybe you get to like rub your heart center. Maybe you get to give yourself a little hand massage. Sometimes the analytical mind, especially when we're navigating like overwhelm, it tells us that in order to get out of overwhelm, we have to do more. And that's normally not the case. So drop out of the analytical mind and drop into the body through senses. Wash your hands. And when it comes to fear of failure, nothing cuts faster through fear or anxiety faster than taking empowered action. Now, that's different than taking action for action's sake. It's not like, oh, I'm just going to like take action and get my to-do list done. Taking empowered action. What's something that you can do that's empowering to you, that's going to fill your cup up? If you're afraid of failure, what do you need to do to navigate that? Do you need to redefine safety? Do you need to go outside and take a breath of fresh air? Do you need to reassess your results? Do you need to have a conversation with your fear? Oftentimes, fear of failure has us feeling paralyzed or stuck, immobile, like we walked into a wall. So, really being able to start to create some new association when we walk into that fear wall of support, of redefinition, of redirection, of inner dialogue, things that are empowering us, filling us up. That's really what's going to offer us new associations, new neural pathways in the brain, and build that muscle of inner trust even more. And fear doesn't always like hanging out with trust. So that's a beautiful muscle to start building, to really start reminding fear that it's okay, it's safe.
I have mixed feelings about this fear concept. Maybe you can clarify because yes, we want to feel safe, and maybe it depends on the person and if they have healing to do. But I recently joined a group where I'm talking in front of people, and that's because I am not comfortable doing that. So I'm kind of leaning into the fear. I am doing something that feels empowering. But at the same time, when I do go to do that, I feel very unsafe. And my body's like, abort. I think statistically, it's like 90% of people would rather, like, they're more afraid of public speaking than they are death, or something like that. I made up that number, but it's very high. I'm just wondering, am I supposed to be listening to my body and go back to safety? Or do I lean into that fear? Maybe it matters also on the context and what it actually is, because another example of this is cold plunging, which I know has negative side effects for people who are healing physical symptoms. So it's definitely not for everybody. Yeah. So where is that line, or what do you listen to the body when it's doing everything in its power to get you to stop what you're about to do?
I think being able to know the different signals in your body is really important because what I'm hearing you say is like, yeah, that fear is taken over, but there's a little like parasited in there. There's choice. It's the feelings of fear, but also knowing that it's propelling you to something that is exciting, something that's growth. There's choice in it. And really being able to understand what is fear in my body, like genuine fear, like I am not safe, I better get out of here, versus like this feels really uncomfortable, fear of like discomfort, fear of uncertainty, fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of ridicule, like all these different fears, they sit differently in the body. And I know that might sound weird, but they do. Just like each one of those fears has a different adjective that goes with it. You know, it sits, it activates, it feels, your sweat is different, all of those things. And so really being able to understand the different signals of your body to know when it's time to like abort versus when it's time to like push through. In regards to that sense of safety as well, not only being able to define it, but know where it is in your body. What does safety feel like in your body? Where does it love to live? So when you're there in the moment, going through all of like the hormones and the chemicals, you get to know that safety is within you. It's this limitless fountain of love and possibility. And I think that's the beauty of it all. And really being able to look at our emotions like fear, excitement, and all of it as if they were like members of our round table. Everyone asks that question. If you could have 5 people at your table, dead or alive, like who would you have be there? Who would your wise counsel be? But what if our emotions were our wise counsel? What if you could say, okay, fear's shown up, fear, like what you got? I'm about to take the stage. What are you saying? And just giving space for all of it to come out and then being like, okay, I get it. I understand. Now coming to the other wise counsel of excitement, of courage. Like, how cool would it be if we could really give voice and personify these emotions?
Mm, I love that so much. So step into the fear, but while you're doing so, kind of self-soothe and look at the thoughts that are coming up and recognize that they're not rational, and you can move forward and what it is that you're doing, knowing that you're safe and telling yourself that you are in a safe environment. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't creating trauma for myself that I'm going to need to later release.
No, it's such a beautiful part of, the growing pains. Like, it's like when we're at the gym and we're feeling that stretch, we're like, oh, I'm a little sore. And just knowing that you're building that muscle of courage, and so I think it's such a beautiful example. So thank you for sharing that
Mm.
experience and for reminding us that like it's not rational. Again, it feels rational, it feels very true to us. And then you can just tell your fear, of course, we're terrified in this moment. I remember seeing that movie where like people were throwing tomatoes at the girl on stage, like, but that was a movie, and I think we're going to be okay. So really being able to hear the irrational, wild thoughts, and then with love and compassion, just bring it back to reality and say, hey, I get it, but everything's okay. And again, stepping back into your choice so that fear doesn't make the decisions for you. Fear doesn't tell you to get off the stage. You make your choice. You stay in your sovereignty.
What are some common misconceptions about embodiment and somatic practices that you would like to address?
I want to say, I think some common misconceptions that I'm hearing more and more is it's not just about exercise. I think I've been seeing a lot of people that are like, yeah, somatics, it's like doing some like hip flexor stretches and pushing against a wall. And it's not just that. It's not just exercises to help, cleanse the nervous system and get your vagal nerve like all toned. It's so much more than that. It's so much more than I even know. It's probably so much more than the world even knows because our body, like I said, truly is that beautiful detailed map of the subconscious mind. And so when we think about somatics, really thinking about understanding the stored innate wisdom that is within us. And when I think of embodiment, I think embodiment is starting to turn into something that is losing a little bit of its gravitas. It's like, well, I'm just embodying this. But can we really redefine it? What does embodiment mean to you? Because until you have your authentic understanding and version and concept of embodiment, just like success, we're going to end up chasing everybody else's version of it. And next thing you know, we're being an embodied version of authenticity without really knowing what that means, without really understanding what it means to us, what it means in this body. And so those are the two big misconceptions, is that embodiment is just stepping into a full version of X, Y, or Z, and somatics being just an exercise or just stretches for the body, because both of them go way beyond that.
What's next for you? What are you excited about for the future?
Ooh, one thing that I'm really, really excited for is I have a women's group program, and it's 9 months. And to say that I'm excited for it, it feels like such an I don't even know how to describe it. I feel like a firework is exploding inside of me. Because I think one thing that I've learned in working with women is the power of being in a group container, of being able to be witnessed in your growth and healing. Because so many of our wounds happen in relation to other people. So when we're able to be witnessed in our healing in relation to other people, it changes, it shifts in the body. And I'm really excited for these new up levels that I'm bringing into it, which include breath work, like body mapping and improv. I was a professional improviser for 7 years. And so really starting to bring in more of the personification to really start to understand like that deeper embodiment of our stored emotions. And my birthday is this month, and for the first time, I'll also be launching a membership site for women and men who are really looking to maybe just kind of start getting their toes a little wet in the healing journey, but aren't fully at the place to dive in. My goal in this business and this life is to be the resource that I wish I'd had in my journey of healing and growth. And as I continue to expand, I want to make sure that I'm there at every level of support for people.
Mm. Lots of amazing things coming from Des. That's so exciting. I will have everything linked in the description, of course. I have one final question for you. What is your number one health tip? Whether it's mindset, diet, and nutrition, physical, emotional, just the one piece of advice that you would like everyone to know.
Ooh, one. Oh my goodness, that's so hard. I guess the one that's coming to mind, and so since it came to mind first, I'll share it. Starting your day with yourself for the first, I know that it's hard, morning, like, but even if you just start 3 minutes, do anything for 3 minutes, not looking at your phone, just talking to yourself, hey, maybe you write in the morning for 3 minutes. Maybe you just lay in bed and you stretch your body for 3 minutes. You do the finger trick. Because when we start our day immediately with the loud and busy world, especially when we're on our screens, we start moving into what's next. We start going into work, into planning. We start waking up the active mind. If we're not starting our day with ourselves, sometimes it could feel like we're catching up all day trying to just come back to ourselves. We're more likely to feel unheard throughout the day. So can you just spend some time in the morning disconnected from the world still, and just give yourself that sacred time of self-worth and love, because you deserve it. And the world is too busy and loud. So right now, maybe you have to give it to yourself, and that's okay, but you deserve it.
That's a great piece that I'm actually working on myself because I kind of fell off. So, yep, starting with a minute, maybe moving to 3, maybe moving to 5.
Yeah.
That it's honestly, it changes your entire day.
It really does, and it's hard, especially when it's like, especially on Mondays after the weekend or, early risers. It can be hard. And we end up, I think for me, in my own battle with it, is we end up like quantifying it, like, oh, well, my time would be better spent doing this. Well, that seems like it's more whatever. I wake up better when my phone wakes me up. We have
Mm.
all these stories in our head, and it's just really interesting to hear them and to be aware of them and just to continue to make the recommitment like you're doing. I'm recommitting to a minute. I'm recommitting to maybe 3 next week, but right now I'm meeting myself with where I'm at.
Mm. Yes, so good. Thank you so much, Des. It has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you and connecting. And like I said, check out the description, find more from Des. Her work is amazing and it's life-changing. And I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing.
Of course, and thank you so much for this amazing community where people can really come in and hear different forms of healing and perspectives, because it's in these spaces like the ones that you're creating, Jessica, that we get to come back to a sense of oneness and really learn from each other. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.